and you're consciously overriding your own central nervous system. That requires massive amounts of determination. Saying before I drew my bow back, I said, I'm shooting this shot perfectly, or I'm not shooting it at all. Pre-ignition movements at that distance with a longbow, you're not going to hit what you think you're going to hit. So, right, and it's that "here I go." Why do we say "here I go"? Because that's the phrase that people use to jump off a cliff.
To be able to actually kill an animal using that fast after I took the class, it just was ingrained in me at that point. I was like, yeah, this definitely works. And
how's it going, John?
Good morning. How are you?
Doing great.
Good. Excellent.
Life's good.
Life has been great.
Busy.
Well, as we always say, we're always busy, right?
That's true.
Everybody's busy.
Yeah. Just gearing up for fall hunts.
Yeah.
Shooting more.
Yes.
Speaking of which, super special guest today.
Absolutely.
Joel Turner from Washington.
Mm-hmm. I don't even like to say I'm from Washington anymore, though.
Soon to be Montana.
Yeah, just
that's right.
Let's just say we're from Montana now. It just has a better ring to it.
That's awesome.
And, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you driving the extra time over here out of your way.
No problem.
He drove a couple hours extra out of his way to get here. And he's doing a clinic yesterday. And so anyway, thank you very much, Joel, for coming. John and I took Joel's class, his clinic, a couple years ago. It's been now. We were trying to figure out, and we went by how old Bodie was.
Yeah.
And I know, I had struggled with target panic like John had as well. And I pretty much have my under control, but no matter how long you've been in shooting, you can never not learn enough.
Right.
You just got to keep an open mind, and I know for John, it's helped him a lot too.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, when I took the class, it was like I had never been formally trained at all. I was shot for years, but it just made such a huge difference, and to this day, it still does.
Yeah, it changes how you think about shooting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? So even if you've got it almost under control, that means that there's still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
Right? Like you don't really know how your shot's going to go.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to get. When we did it a couple of years ago, I'm constantly growing in this instructor thing and just trying to figure out the fail points. And that biggest fail point is people treat their shot, it's still a mystery. Right? Like they get all hooked up in the bow and they don't really know how it's going to go. Like if they're having a problem, maybe they're locked off the target or they're punching the trigger just a little bit or whatever. They wonder, how am I going to do on this one? And if you have that slight bit of wonder in your shot, then you've already handed that shot to autopilot. So it's really demystifying this shot and getting it down to some very specific steps.
Exactly.
And knowing what's coming next. It's very powerful to know what's coming next, especially in those high-stress shooting events where, maybe you've got that big pronghorn buck in front of you or whatever, and you know exactly how the shot's going to go. You've controlled everything you possibly can. And that's where we're at now with it. Really demystifying this stuff and mapping out the decisions that need to be made. So it's very powerful stuff. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just saying it is very powerful. It's been very powerful in my life to figure out how I'm going to do it. Yeah, and Bodie's, you're right. I mean, when you watch Bodie shoot, there's no question.
And for those of you who know, Bodie is Joel's son. And at the ripe old age, 14 one day, and actually turned 15 during the Worlds in Vegas, he stepped up to shoot with the pros and could have stayed in the youth.
Sure, yeah.
And smoked that.
Yeah.
But he stepped up with all the big names, all the pros, and I know I've told Joel this. I was actually watching the shoot off, live streaming it on TV here, and even though I didn't know Bodie, we don't know him that well, but I have met him, been around him.
Sure.
It just as a father, I guess, too. I got teared up. I ain't gonna lie, it's just tough not to. 'Cause he just amazed me.
Just watching it, just watching his demeanor, I can really tell where his mind's at by his shot. Like you'll see the follow through is just slightly different on one that he didn't like as much, and The only thing he doesn't like about it is maybe where the shot broke. But we've got the setup, and we've been doing so much work on stabilization in bows that we've got it to the point now where you keep your sight movement so fast that you cannot comprehend it. Meaning it moves, it's slightly jittery, it's not just parked in the middle.
Okay.
Because if it parks in the middle, that means that it's actually moving too slow.
Oh.
Right? So and there's some tests that we do, like if you take a Vegas face and you aim at that Vegas face with that yellow center, and with a pretty small black dot, like a dot that's no bigger than the 10 ring, right? Okay. And of course you're shooting magnification usually on the compound setup. So you get that pin moving fast enough to where if it looks like it breaks in the 9, it's still a 10. Oh. So if you break a shot and it breaks and you're like, ooh, that's going to be a high right 9, and it is a high right 9, your bow is too heavy because you've slowed the rate of return down so much that it can't get back into the middle.
You're talking, when you're saying too heavy, you're talking about your
mass weight.
Mass weight.
Right, mass weight on the bow, because people are really weighting their bows up and they're actually fighting their own mind with it. They're fighting their own visual proprioception because that pin's just floating real slow, and as soon as they can comprehend that it's not in the 10, they stop their release movement. Right?
Gotcha.
So it's a very interesting thing, and it's getting to the point where stabilizers are more for feel than they are accuracy. So, I mean, I've been having in my clinics, I've been having people completely strip their bow of their stabilizers and shoot. And they're not less accurate.
Really?
Right? It's more of a visual acceptance.
I know. You see some guys who are shooting, nothing against them at all. They can shoot what they want. But like back bars and stuff on their hunting.
Sure.
And I mean, of course, I'm thinking, that's that much more weight you got to pack around.
And Bodie does that, and it drives me insane. But you can't argue with his accuracy.
No,
right? So
you can't.
I'm just like, but he's never been on a real big mountain hunt with that bow either. I'm like, you're gonna pack that thing up the mountain. I'm not.
Here you are with your stick bow.
Right here I am with my 1.5 pound longbow. So, but it's very interesting to see and to kind of shift this whole regime of heavy bows and lots of weight on your stabilizer. Just get that pin moving faster, and the faster you get your pin moving, the easier it is to let it go, right? Just to step away from it, because it's as good as it's going to get anyways.
Right.
And getting people to that point where they can just put the pin on and then just step away from it, because there's way more important stuff than aiming, right? So,
and honestly, not to cut you off, but you taught that in the class that I took, and that was one of the things that, you stop. I think you talked about not really paying attention to your pen, know, and focusing on the release and stuff. And I had never made that connection before. Like, oh my gosh, that makes so much more sense.
Yeah, it's just, when you really look at it, you don't have control over it anyways.
Right.
Put that pin in the middle and enjoy the show.
Yeah.
Because you don't have control of it. And you want to make the show acceptable, right? You shouldn't be, moving all over the place.
Yeah. Right.
But everybody's born with a certain level of visual proprioception. You might be steadier than me. There's nothing I can do about that. I can put as much stabilization on my bow as I want, but if I slow it down to that point of you're fighting it, then you've just degraded your accuracy with it.
Yeah.
And you've degraded how you think in a shot. So
now most, like this stuff that you're talking about, aiming, it's almost, it can just roll over into scopes too, as well, as far as that. So we do have some, a lot of viewers that aren't necessarily archery hunters, but they're gun hunters. And you and I were talking about, I told you at the crosshair thing, how once it's on there, you just
it's a bit different with rifles. Like I just filmed my online rifle course at Shot IQ, and we do a lot of aiming stuff in that. Whereas it's different when you deal with a magnified optic, because they're on the same focal plane. The spot you want to hit and the reticle are on the same focal plane now, so they're both in focus. So what do we look at, right? Whereas in archery, they're not on the same focal plane.
Gotcha.
So in rifles, you want to focus on the spot you want to hit, okay? Because it's going to be in focus, and if you focus on the spot you want to hit, then the reticle always has something to attach to. Now in rifles, because your body's not in tension, you should be able to call your shot. Right? You're just watching it dance, enjoying the show, talking yourself through that trigger press, and when that rifle breaks, you should be able to call your shot. You should not be able to call your shot in archery. You should not be able to call it because the pin is moving faster, right?
Gotcha.
So in rifles, you get, if you're shooting a heavy rifle, the more steady the rifle is, that's cool. But it's not so attached to accuracy as we think, right? It's going to blow people's minds. Like, what if, because I can standing unsupported. And I do that drill a lot, especially in the online course. We talk about how to actually stand and shoot, because it's not like Olympic shooting. You're not wearing a shooting jacket and all those things. You're out in the field, and there's different methods of actually raising your arms and setting the rifle in somewhat of a cradle to get the left and right movement out of it, because you have forces coming from each side of the rifle. So it's pretty interesting stuff. But, shooting targets out there at 250 yards, maybe an 8-inch plate, standing unsupported, if you go open loop on the trigger, like if you try to catch it, because there's this thing in the military especially of a sideways figure 8 movement. I've never seen a sideways figure 8 movement in a sight, but they talk about how you start pressing the trigger as it's coming in and you catch it, right? You're supposed to get through the trigger right when it gets to the apex of that. That's going to be open loop on the trigger, but that's been taught for literally centuries. Right, and it still is in firearms instruction today.
If you don't mind, I wanted you to give just a little bit of your background, and I know we got right into talking about shooting, but just so people understand that I just didn't swing by and pick you up downtown and say, "Hey, Joe, we want to come talk about this."
Right. So in the firearms world, I pressed the trigger on a 30-30 for the first time at 5 years old, and the second time I pressed the trigger on that 30-30, I guarantee I about yarded it off the rifle. Right? So it's funny because you get one chance. You get one chance in life to shoot a perfect shot. And then as soon as your body feels the recoil, it instantly formulates motor programs around it. And that was me at 5 years old. So at 5, I shot my dad's 30-30. And I thought I was such a man at that time, right? But I remember the second shot was an absolute nightmare. The first one was good, but the second one was an absolute nightmare. So then I progressed. BB guns were my thing, right? Growing up, BB guns. I have 2 older brothers, and we all got a BB gun when we were 9. When we turned 9, that was our BB gun year, right? And of course, my oldest brother he's 3 years older than me. And I wore his BB gun out, right? He never shot it. Really? I shot it every day, and I literally broke it. I shot it so much I broke it. Well, then my other brother's a year older than me, and I broke his BB gun too. So when I turned 9, I got a Daisy 880 Powerline. This was big time, right? Pump pneumatic, so I had to pump that bad boy 10 times. Man, I tell you what, I was a machine with that because there was no recoil.
Yeah.
So, but you put me on a centerfire rifle at those young ages. I was worthless. Worthless. Oh my gosh. Even almost to the point of a 22. And then I was able to control myself with that. So life progressed through high school and stuff. Massive target panic in archery. Loved shooting. I shot a bow since I was 7 years old. And just a nightmare. Locked off target. A long ways off target. I mean, we're talking feet off target. I would jump to the target, and then I would figure out gravity, so I'd go around the target, and I'd drop my bow into it, but I could never get close, right? And so
drive by.
But bow hunting started at 14, and missing bull after bull. I had some opportunities in Washington to really hunt some good spots, and man, just missing, and it was just very frustrating in those early years. And then into adulthood.
Did you ever accidentally shoot one?
Yeah, I mean, I killed some stuff, but not very much. I killed my first deer with a bow at 15. I remember I shot that deer at 15 yards. And I can remember Martin Lynx Magnum bow, 2216 autumn oranges, 4 Fletch, 4-inch Marco veins, Thunderhead 125, and I snuck up on this big black-tailed doe, and she stood there at 15 yards. And I can remember aiming several feet over her back at 15 yards, shooting bare bow, because I couldn't put a pin on the target anyways. Right. So you might as well take your sights off your bow, right? So I'd take my sights off my bow just to shoot bare bow to be cool, like Ted Nugent at the time. And so I remember drawing back and just being way over her back, and I just dropped my bow and shoot, and I ended up shooting her in the spine. I got my first deer. So, and then went to college and was a goose hunting guide in college. Oh. And shotgunning was good.
In Washington?
Yeah, in Washington. Shotgunning was good for me. But centerfire rifles were not. I just could not concentrate on the trigger press. I was always, usually infatuated with the aim and all that stuff. So through college, I got in with USDA, Wildlife Services, and then got out of college and started working for USDA, which was all air rifle work. Oh. Animal damage control, starlings, pigeons, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. I was damn good with an air rifle. I even wrote a manual for the USDA on how to shoot these air rifles, right? Shotgunning, awesome. But then you put me on a coyote contract. I was not your guy. And it frustrated the heck out of me because I could shoot. At this point with rifles, now I'm starting to gain some control. I could shoot rifles on a target, but I was not your guy for coyote contracts and anything that required centerfire work. So then I became a cop I was 24 years old. I became a cop, and that was my determination. Well, I'm like, I can't screw this up. So in the academy, I bought, when I was 21, I bought a Glock. Mm-hmm. Of course, a Glock's got kind of a squishy trigger on it, and by God, I couldn't hit anything with it, right? I would always shoot low and left. I'm like, gosh, these pistols always shoot low and left. Well, what's the matter with these sights? Right. So it's because I was yanking that trigger. So knowing that, when I got in the academy, I bought a 1911, right? Much shorter trigger stroke, and I shot it much better, right? Huh. So not realizing that I had done a mechanical fix to a mental problem. So during the academy, I started to gain some control of my shot and got some instruction, but the instruction was always front sight, front sight, front sight. The instructors would repeat that over and over and over again. I'm like, I don't think that's the problem, right? I don't think I'm aiming incorrectly. So during the academy, one of my buddies, he's still a cop. I just retired, but he's still a cop, and he was not going to pass firearms. So in the academy, I sold him my pistol, right? Sold him my pistol so that we did a mechanical fix to his mental problem, and I bought another 1911 that had an even better trigger in it. Nice. So in the academy, I ended up taking first in my class in firearms, right?
Did he pass that too?
He did. He passed with it was in the 70s. It was like 71 and a gun, right? So he passed it, and then, but that's where I found my passion for instruction. Oh. Really, I loved working people through drills and helping them out, and I got just a little taste of that actually in the academy. They let me run some courses for my class, and then I was a cop for 2 years, and then I was going to get laid off at an agency, so I went to another agency, and there was a couple of stipulations. I'm like, I want to be a firearms instructor, and I want to be eligible to be on the SWAT team for the county. And so I was granted those, and I became a firearms instructor 2 years into my police career. And at that same time, I got hired at the academy as an instructor. Just a brand new instructor. So that put me through some of those paces, and that's where I really started to figure out, how am I going to get this new police officer to concentrate on a trigger press when somebody's trying to kill them, right? And that was a driving factor for me to really start to figure things out. But I was still, in the archery world, not controlling my shot. And so here I am now, I'm on the SWAT team. SWAT sniper, right? They put me instantly on the sniper crew because I could shoot a target well, right? But if they had seen me try to shoot a coyote or some big game animal with a rifle, I guarantee you they wouldn't have put me on the sniper crew. So there I am, fudging my way through this thing, trying to figure this all out, and I started to gain control of things in the firearms world in a big way, and started to figure out, I need to talk myself through this trigger, not knowing any of the science of what I was doing. And then, and I know this story's getting long, but so in bow hunting still, now I'm starting to gain control of my shot in tournaments in front of people, but in bow hunting, I don't know how it's going to go, right? And that scared the hell out of me because I didn't know how it was going to go in the lethal force sniper world.
If you ever had...
That's not a good feeling, right? Because I'm thinking back to all the coyotes that I've missed, right? And how's it going to go when I got to put lethal force on somebody that's holding a hostage or something like that? So that drove me. The cop world, the SWAT world drove my determination. But the sounding board was always bow hunting, because you don't get in that many gunfights as a cop, but you hope to get in lots of stressful shooting environments in the bow hunting world, or in the rifle hunting world. So that was always my sounding board. So I'd have some success, some failure, but I wouldn't blueprint it, right? So then years progressed. I became the lead firearms instructor at the academy for the state full-time, and that's where I really got to do the experimentation that I needed to do. That's what allowed me to do the paths of research to figure out neurolinguistic programming, visual proprioception, open and closed loop control systems, because I had some key people. So I was starting to develop this program of concentration and how do we actually perform in high-stress shooting events. And I had this one gentleman that was fairly high up in the academy, and he told me one day, he says, "What you're doing works, but it's not right." I'm like, okay. Well, I want to know what's right. He says, "Well, to do that, you have to take my course." So I took his course, and that's where I started to get, I had all these shooting experiences, but I didn't have the science, right? Mm-hmm. What science am I working with? So that class actually illustrated to me the science that I was working with, and I was able to mesh that with the experiences, and that is how Shot IQ was born.
Gotcha.
Really starting to figure out the fail points of human beings in high-stress shooting events. And so then, in the sniper world, that became no question on how it was going to go, right? And in the bow hunting world, that became no question on how that was going to go. But it took some real digging deep turning points, right? Like you had a turning point when you came to the clinic.
Exactly.
You got to get to the point where I'm doing it this way no matter what, because it's how it works, right? It's not, what I teach at Shot IQ is not Joel Turner's opinion, right? When I was growing up and I was searching for the answer, the solutions, I was always dealing with people's opinion, and no fault to them, but there's a lot of good shooters out there that don't know how they do what they do. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't help anybody. Right? It doesn't help me or anybody else to watch this professional archer and go, "Man, I wish I could do that." And you ask them some questions and they don't know how they do what they do, right? They've got a specific way that works for them, but it's not necessarily science-based, so it doesn't work for you. And I've completely tried to change that approach. There's nothing that I tell people that works for them. It's just, that's not the way it works, right? So nothing works for them. They have to work for it. But I teach people what work needs to be done and then how to actually do the work in their high-stress shooting event. And it's very powerful stuff. So there you go. That's my life history of Joel Turner and Shot IQ. So,
that's awesome.
And it's a cool story. I mean, I know we had talked a little bit about it before, but for you to come from that point to hitting a vital shot on an animal target.
Sure.
Like 3D.
Sure.
At well over 100 yards with no sights at all, with your stick bow is just like, you've come a long way. Yeah. And granted, I know it's target as opposed to hunting. But then I know you said there was like 1 year that actually, you had mentioned before, there was like 1 year, from 1 year to the next when you finally made your mind up.
Right.
That you put everything into effect.
And it was a matter of blueprinting it, because I had... I've told this story a million times, but I had one success in 2008 shooting at a hog in South Texas, where I was actually so pissed off that I let the shot down. And I said, I'm not doing this again. And then the next time I pulled my bow back on that same hog, making those decisions. I'm going to shoot this shot perfectly, or I'm not shooting it at all. And I've since changed that original decision to, I'm shooting the shot with control no matter what. But back then, that was just what came to me. I'm shooting this shot perfectly, or I'm not shooting it at all. And it was that moment that it meant more to me to stay in the shot process than to kill the animal. But I never blueprinted it. Right? So that was the problem. 2009, I killed some bulls, and horrible. Right? Punched the trigger like a wild man on those. Killed the elk, shot him right in the middle, but it was only because I was able to aim, at least get to the aim. And that was a huge step, because before, and there's a lot of people out there, a lot of your listeners can't even put their pin on a target right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? And they're going into the season knowing that they're not going to be able to put their pin on a critter.
Yeah.
Right.
That is a scary proposition.
I've been there.
That's what took me so many years of failure. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to do well with it. So,
and it kind of stinks because, they take vacation time. They do all the preparation for camp and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They stay in shape and everything.
Yeah.
But what good does any of that do you if you're not confident and you don't have the proper
And it's
mindset?
It's a desperate feeling, because you're not going to get your pin on the target, and it gets so much worse in high stress.
Yeah.
So back then it was just a matter of me not blueprinting how I did it. 2010 came along. I had another success. I shot that shot exactly like I shot the one in 2008 on that bull, and I never blueprinted. So 2011, 12, 13, 14, I'm killing critters, but I'm not totally controlling my shot. So, and people are like, well, what's the big deal, right? I mean, you're killing critters. But the big deal was my SWAT stuff. I'm like, man, I did it again. I did not get through my shot. And then it just scared the hell out of me that I wasn't going to perform it when it came to a lethal force incident. So then after December 14th, 2014, when that big blacktail buck came in and he stood underneath my stand, and then he turned around, walked back out, stood at 8 yards. I drew that bow back, my recurve, and I shot him at 8 yards right in the heart. But I did not get through my shot. Right? I was shooting a recurve at the time with a tab sear. No, not a tab. I was shooting a thumb ring, so I was shooting a grip sear, which is just a matter of fingernail on the edge of the riser, and then you just press that thing until it pops. The mechanoreceptors. It's a whole system. But anyways, I didn't get through that. I got to my aim. And as soon as my aim was complete, I shot that arrow. And I shot it in what we call the critical second, right? That 1 second in time after you believe the aim is complete. That's when most people fire the shot, be that with a rifle or with a bow or whatever. And if you do that, if you shoot within that 1 second, you are definitely going open loop on the trigger. Too fast, right? If you go open loop on the trigger, there will be pre-ignition movements linked to your trigger motor program. You will flinch in some way, shape, or form. And your bullet or your arrow is not going where you think it is. So I shot that shot, and I knew that I didn't get through my sear, and I'm like, I just sat there in that tree stand, and then it got dark. And then it started raining. I just sat there. I'm like, what was it? I got to go through the Rolodex of shots. And I was thinking, and I'm thinking. And there was that one shot in 2008 on that hog that I remember saying before I drew my bow back, I said, I'm shooting this shot perfectly, or I'm not shooting it at all. And then as I drew my bow back, I said, I'm going to do this right. And then after I got my aim, I said, here I go. And that got me present enough to remember to talk myself through whatever my trigger was, right? And it was exactly the same in 2010 on that bull. I shot that bull at 41 yards with my longbow. And if you have any pre-ignition movements at that distance with a longbow, you're not going to hit what you think you're going to hit. So those two shots were identical, but I never blueprinted them at the time. So I sat there in that tree stand like, what was it? And it was the decisions that I made and the specific timing of those decisions. And those are the times when autopilot tries to come in and snatch the shot away from us, right? Before we even draw the bow back, that's when most people have already handed the shot to autopilot, because they're thinking about where the critter needs to stop, which is a thought that needs to happen, right? But they can't bring themselves out of it. Or they're thinking about, oh my God, it's a 7x7, right? I'm going to be a hero. They think about things that are in the future, so that it makes it impossible for them to follow their shot process. It's not even available to them, right? Until you open the door to the shot control house. So, and we can talk about that analogy that we use now, but you have to at least make your shot process available to you, and that only comes from making decisions. Like when that bull finally turns broadside, say something, right? I'm shooting this shot with control no matter what, or just no matter what. Say something to increase your presence. And then as you draw your bow back, that's when autopilot tries to spin out of control again, right? So as you draw, say something to yourself. I'm going to do this right. Stay in the process. Whatever you want to do, increase your presence by making decisions.
Right.
And then finally, once you get the aim, it's not time to shoot. It's time to decide.
Right.
Right? And it's that here I go. Why do we say here I go? Because that's the phrase that people use to jump off a cliff. That's the phrase that's commonly used for somebody to actually do a movement that causes their body impact. It requires a conscious override of the central nervous system. For you to actually work your trigger slow enough you could stop it, requires a conscious override of the central nervous system. And that requires a conscious decision to do that.
Right.
You'll never just find yourself overriding your central nervous system.
I think for me, like, it really got ingrained in me after I took shortly after I took your class, and I've been shot every day because it did take me a little while to get that down every single time. Probably longer than some people. I don't know why, but that's just me. But anyway, it was I was able to shoot a bear, and just shortly after the class, a month or whatever it was, and I in my head I was I did the whole mantra, and I think killing that bear. And when I shot him, it's like, oh my gosh, that was so easy,
Right.
Yeah, it was cool. But I think that being for me, because I don't do a lot of 3D tournaments, just my job and stuff, I can't do them. So for me to be able to actually kill an animal using that fast after I took the class, it just was ingrained in me at that point. I was like, yeah, this definitely works. And yeah, so it was. I think that helped me out.
And people always ask me, how long does your program take? How long does your program take? I tell them, it takes you one shot.
Right.
Literally one shot, one controlled shot, and understanding the science of how you did it, right? What decisions did you make, right? The whole blueprint. What were you thinking after here I go?
Right.
You need to be thinking about your shot activation movement, whatever that is for you. Is it squeezing the release? Is it pulling? Is it rolling? Whatever it is. What are you thinking about after here I go? Because that's a ways down the shot. You don't get to here I go until after you've already aimed and you've addressed the trigger somehow, right? So what are you thinking after here I go? Second question, what was I saying after here I go? Which is basically your mantra, right? So is it pull?
Right.
Is it keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling? What you say is what will move. How you say it is how you move.
Right.
Neurolinguistic programming, right? So it's the route to concentration. So knowing exactly what verbiage you're going to use to direct and trap your concentration.
Yep.
Question number 3, could I have stopped it? Was I so keenly concentrated on my shot activation movement that I could have stopped it anywhere within it? And if you can say yes, that's a big ask. If you can say yes to that, that means that you have enough determination to make a decision so that you are present, so that you could concentrate, right? Those fundamentals of shooting. So if you can say, yes, I could have stopped that trigger anywhere within it, that's a big deal, right? That's a really big deal because you were truly in a closed loop control system.
Right.
And then finally, what decisions did you make to get yourself in the process for that one shot? How did you open the door to the shot control house? How do you do that for you? How do you close the door on the aiming room? How do you, get into the concentration room? It's just, it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So
it's so mental. Like, I know the actual action is such a little part of the holding the bow and all that stuff, but to actually go through the little mantras, it for a lot of people, I know me, I had such a hard time with my
target pack.
Yeah. That, oh man, and it's such an easy thing because once you figure it out and your system, obviously, people just, big thing is not only is applying it. I mean, I'm sure you have lots of people that take your course and aren't getting the results like the online course, whatever, like they'd like, because they really don't truly. We talked a little bit about this last night. You help them, you give them all the tools, you know, but yet if they don't apply it, then
and I tell them right off, nothing that I tell you is going to work for you, right? And there's no, it's the conscious defiance of human nature is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you're consciously overriding your own central nervous system. That requires massive amounts of determination. Well, if you're not determined enough to do that, you will always be stuck out of shot control. You'll never actually gain control of your shot. And it's truly what we're all seeking. I mean, everybody wants to be able to be, and not be calm, but be effective, right? And know how the shot's going to go. So I don't have too many people that are of that way. I mean, most of them realize that this is not my opinion. This is not Joel Turner's opinion on how to shoot a bow or a rifle or whatever. This is just how your mind works.
Yeah, science.
Take it or leave it, right? Yeah. I'm not selling my opinion. So it's very interesting stuff. And,
but it's proven.
Yeah, I mean it's proven over and over and over again. It's not. I don't have people come to me and say, "Oh, Turner, that is such crap."
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, well, I mean, it's not like I made this stuff up.
So. And we won't mention no names, but I mean, you've worked with some of the top archers.
Oh yeah.
You know, all over, and so.
And they have the same problems that everybody else does, but they're very determined people.
Yeah.
Right. You get high level military operators. They're very determined people, and they're very smart. They learn things, right? And professional archers are the same way. There's some that have experienced extreme success, but then it falls away, and then they regain it, right? When they become conscious again and start making decisions. And when you look at their path, you'll see as soon as they get really good, they stop making decisions. Right? And then they start to fall away. And then they get to a rock bottom where they get more determination because now they're not winning. So now their determination goes up. Well, now they start making decisions. I've got to change something, right? And then they start to come back up. And then because they don't know the science of what they did, they start to fall away again. That's where, you know, when you do the Shot IQ program, there is no falling away. I mean, the only way that you would fall away from it is you stop making decisions. If you get to the point where you're like, oh, I got this, right? I got this. But there is a certain amount of. Now let's talk about the shot control house real quick because it lends itself to so many things. The shot control house is just an analogy that we use, and I kind of got it through SWAT stuff because when you would go to a house, if we did a hit on a house or something, if you didn't know the layout of the house, like you didn't have any intel about that house or anything like that, when you blow the door off and you go through there, it's smoky, it's loud, it's flashbangs, it's all kinds of stuff. You go through that and you don't know what you're getting into. You don't know if there's somebody standing behind the door with a rifle or what there may be. So you're moving. You're moving through this house and it's this instant evaluation of rooms and which way does the door open, how do we stack on this, and it's just you're going through these houses. Well, then you get another SWAT call out and it's at the same house and you've been through that house before, right? So you know that Tweaker Bob stays behind the closet, right, in this one bedroom or whatever. So it's you start going, so now they've replaced the door, but when you blow that new door off, it's the same inside, right? So you have a better idea of how to move, and when you train, you get the first rep through a house, and then you know the floor plan, right?
That makes sense.
So your shot is the same way. So when you are all hooked up on your bow, and you're about to take this shot, you believe the shot is imminent, like maybe that buck turns broadside, or you're at a big tournament and you're about to shoot this shot, you are on the porch of the shot control house. But the door is closed, right? Your shot process lives inside the house, but your door is closed. It's not even available to you at this point. So how do we open the door of the shot control house? You make decisions. I'm shooting this shot with control no matter what. The door now opens for you. So this big giant front door swings open, and you drawing your bow back is you crossing the threshold of that door. But the first room that you walk into is the aiming room, right? And it is a party in there for most people, right? They get in that aiming room, there's all the disco balls and all kinds of stuff, and they're thinking about their aim, and they start talking to people in the aiming room. They're looking at the pictures on the wall. Maybe they even sit on the couch, right? Your mind will try to keep you in the aiming room, because if it can keep you in there, then it can let the subconscious have the rest of the house. And the subconscious will run through that house like Wreck-It Ralph and will punch the hell out of that trigger, because it's trying to keep you safe, right? Your aiming room is your safe room.
Safe space.
Right? So you just don't linger in the aiming room. And people linger in that aiming room by bringing the pin up real slow. And then as soon as it gets close, it slows down and it stops. It locks. You just sat on the couch.
Right.
You're now in there with all your friends, right? And so don't linger in the aiming room. If you know it's 20 yards or 30 yards or whatever it is, if you know your sight picture, get it done. Right? And we always talk about that. Draw your bow back, aim, get it done, watch to keep it. Mm-hmm. So don't linger in that room. Just walk through it. Get it done, but then you got to get out of that room. You got to close the door. So the mechanical signal that you are now close the door on the aiming room is you addressing the trigger. Right? So now we address the trigger. That's us closing the door on the aiming room.
Exactly. Yep.
But man, John, it sounded so fun in there. Right? So you want to go back in. Your mind wants to go back into the aiming room. So you got to lock that door. How do you lock the door in the aiming room? Decisions. Mm-hmm. Right? So now we've closed the door on the aiming room by addressing the trigger. Then we make a decision. Here I go.
Right.
Here I go. Locks the door on the aiming room and opens the door on the concentration room. But here's the problem. Concentration room is on fire. So this is where it gets into how much determination would it take for you to walk into a room that's on fire, knowing that you're going to get burnt. Massive amounts of determination to do that, right? So for your mind to walk into this room, knowing there's an explosion that lives in there, you're going to get burnt, right? So the determination's got to be deep enough that you can get yourself through that door of the concentration room. But here's the other problem. You can only walk fast enough that you could stop your step anywhere within it. Closed loop, right? Yeah. So you are walking yourself through this release movement. All the time you've got, oh my God, it's a 7x7. When's this thing going to go off? Right. I'm going to be a hero. So you've got all these thoughts that are coming in, and you're trying to move slow enough you could stop it through this room, getting burnt the entire time, knowing this explosion's coming. So that's what requires massive amounts of concentration to get yourself through that room. So how would you do that? If you literally had to walk through a room that's on fire, slow enough you could stop your step, you would have to talk yourself through that.
It's true.
Right? And you would have to be the loudest one in the room. Because all these thoughts that are coming in, they're loud. Right? I mean, that bull elk standing in front of you, he's drawing your concentration, right? So you have to be able to bring it back. So that's why you got to be the loudest one in the room.
Right.
So your mantra is not keep pulling, keep pulling. It's keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. You got to use the aggression in speech. Don't change the speed of it.
Right.
But change the aggression of it, right? Mm-hmm. So you're walking yourself through that room and all of a sudden, bah! It breaks as a surprise.
Right.
That's you jumping out the back door of the house. So when you knock another arrow on, you're not in the house anymore, right? You're standing on the front porch again. So you got to make those decisions. Now, where I was going with this is I want you to get to the point. I want shooters to get to the point where there is no front door, right? So when you step up on the porch, you don't have to stand there and go, I'm shooting this shot with control no matter what. If it's a mystery to you, you need to make that decision to demystify your shot. But I want you to get to the point where you set an explosive charge on that door and you blow it to smithereens. So that when you walk up on the porch, you've got your arrow knocked and things are fairly automatic. You can just walk right in. You draw your bow back and you walk in the aiming room and there's nobody in there. That's where I need you to get to, right? There's no door and there's nobody in your aiming room. So it's easier to walk through there. And it's very liberating for people that come to the class or take the online course because you learn the science of aiming, and the fact that you don't have any control over it anyways. Exactly. So put your pin on there and you don't even put your finger on the trigger until after you have aimed.
Right.
And that's pretty powerful. That gets people at least to aim at the target first and see that you don't have any control over it anyways, right? So getting everybody kicked out of your aiming room. There's no pictures on the wall. There's no furniture to sit on. Just, it's a blank room that you still have to walk through. Get it done, right? And then you get good at closing the door on the aiming room by addressing the trigger and starting to become very conscious about that.
Right.
And then you increase that presence tenfold more when you say, here I go. You get really good at locking that door. And you actually get good at going back in the aiming room if you need to, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say that this big bull's coming in, right? And you get your bow drawn back and he puts his head behind the tree and you're like, oh my God, that's perfect, right? And you get your aim exactly where you want it. You wrap your finger on the trigger, here I go, pull, and the bull steps out of the hole. You got to stop the train, right? You stop everything because now it's a new aim. So now you have to go back in the aiming room, which is no big deal anymore. There's nobody to talk to in there, right? You just simply go back in the aiming room, fix the aim, and you get yourself back out with here I go. So you know how to go in and out of the aiming room. Same thing with wind. If you got big wind that's pushing you completely off the critter or whatever, you got to make an ethical decision. Is there too much wind for me to make an ethical shot? But if it's only pushing you or bumping you a little bit, you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back and forth, right? You may have to go in that aiming room 3 or 4 times in one shot. So be it.
Right.
It becomes very easy to maneuver through the house. And that's where I want people to be, right? No front door, because you shooting a controlled shot is no longer a question, right? There's no mystery to it. You know exactly how you're going to do it and that you're going to do it every single time, no matter what. So that's where I'm at. That's where a lot of shot IQ folks are at. That's where certainly where Bodie is at. I hope that's where you guys are.
Yeah.
There's no door on your shot control house. You simply walk right in, but don't ever let go of here I go.
Yeah.
Here I go it's the giant reset button. It's the giant presence button. And when you hit that after your aim and after you've addressed the trigger, here I go, let's do this, let's get some. Whatever you say to yourself, fill that critical second. And then you will become intensely present so that you remember to talk yourself through that shot.
Because it puts you in the moment.
That is
for lack of a better word.
That is how you get yourself in the moment, right? You talk to a lot of professional athletes and they get themselves in the zone, but they can't tell you how they do it.
Right.
So it's making that conscious decision. Whatever decision you would need to make to get you to jump yourself off a cliff. Right? Because you think about that, you got your little toesies hanging over the edge there. If you're thinking in the future, you will not move your body off the cliff. If you're thinking about how deep the water is, or you don't know if Bob made it when he just jumped off the cliff, right? You don't know.
Right.
So it takes a conscious override, and that requires that decision to do that. So
yeah, it does that. Here I go, or whatever you say, it does. It puts you in that closed loop, I guess, right? And yeah, that's when you really, for me, I mean, that is the saying that gets you in that moment there.
Right.
And it just makes
so the shot that we've developed is very simple. It basically has 4 steps to it. You draw back and aim.
Right.
Then you address the trigger. Be that a thumb button, a hinge. If it's a hinge, you would then roll to the click, or you address the index finger. So you draw back and aim, then you address the trigger, then you make a decision, then you talk yourself through the movement. It's 4 steps of the shot, right? And it's very simple. So when I have, like if I'm guiding elk hunts or taking somebody hunting, and they come to me, and it's funny because these guys spend so much money on these elk hunts, and they come to me and they know they can't put their pin on the target. Because that first thing I have them do as soon as they get in camp is I have them shoot. And I'm like, how long has it been since you can't put your pin on the target? They're like, I've been doing this for 25 years. Like, man, I've been there, right? You don't need to follow that path. So I get them to at least put their pin on the target, and then here I go, make that decision. And then if they do punch the trigger a little bit, I've only got a moment in time before we go hunting, so I get them at least to that, through that critical second. And it's, I had 4 hunters come into camp in Colorado this past year, and all 4 of them were one shot done. We killed 4 bulls in 2 days, basically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I ran those guys through the shooting process because most of them couldn't even put a pin on the target. So
it's amazing.
And that's
like
normal.
He says, how most people, they'll spend all that money, all the equipment and everything, but then none of that does you any good if you can't.
But it's not their fault. It's just how we learn things, right? We learn by being cognitive at the start, right? You get that one perfect shot, you get one chance, and then you start to practice. Well, if you're punching the trigger, or especially if you're punching the trigger as soon as your pin gets on the target, you're literally practicing your own failure.
Yeah.
And archery is going to be a rough road for you because the more you do it, the more efficient you get at it, right? And the more just the pin just barely gets on there and you punch the trigger. Then the pin doesn't even get on there and you're thinking, why is that pin off there? And then they jump and you punch the trigger and you still hit the target, like, well, whatever, you know. And then when you get that big old bull in front of you, all your whole rack of pins is underneath his chest, and it doesn't really matter which one you're going to use.
Right.
So
I do remember having my pin sighted in on the edge of the circle, and I could hold it there forever. But there's no way I could move it in the middle at all, and so that's where it was sighted in.
Yeah,
to hit the bullseye.
Right.
Yeah, it's a thing,
right?
For sure.
Well, I think you've said it before. Everybody has target panic.
Yeah, you're born with it. You're born with an aversion to an explosion.
It's just controlling it.
Yeah, it's just how good are you at the conscious override? And you know, there are people that are very determined in their personality, and those people pick it up quicker than those that are not as determined. Or maybe somebody that in their life hasn't had to make a bunch of life-altering decisions or whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, you can use your life experience to help your shooting, for sure. So, there you have it.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I love it.
So, next thing is, now that you're retired.
Yeah.
He retired at the ripe old age of
45.
45.
Yeah, I'm 46 now. So it just, you know,
this has opened up so much now for you.
It really has, and just really being able to travel all over the country and do these clinics and I see the same things over and over again. So that's why we've been able to develop such an effective program, because you see the same things and you ask people the same questions, and they're like, oh, I never thought of that, right? So
exactly.
It's been a blessing to be able to retire from law enforcement. But law enforcement was the determination well that got me to this place. It got me all the opportunities, and I thank the people that were involved for that, but it got me the opportunities to get in front of people and learn how the mind works, you know? So.
And now that, you're able to travel with Bodie, that's awesome too.
Yeah, being able to be with him and watch him shoot is pretty cool. It's funny because I know his shot so well that I'm watching him, and the only advice I ever give Bodie is keep it moving. That's the only advice I ever give him, because I know that if he
knows it, he's learned so much that he's to that point where he just keeps doing it over and over again. Right. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, but keep it moving, right? What I mean by that is keep your release moving. Because I know that if he can feel his release moving, that his conscious mind is in that movement.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's not in the aim. So he shot that 660 at the Lancaster Classic, which is the third one in history in the qualification round, perfect 660. And on the very last shot, he let a shot down. And when you listen to the interview afterwards, he talks about that shot that he let down.
Yeah.
And he talks all about the aim.
Yeah.
And how the pin was bouncing from red to red, right? So if I know just from his interview there, I was in my patrol car back home watching it on my phone. But that interview, he talks about his aim, which means that he was in the aiming room, right? And that shot got stale because he was in the aiming room. And but he's smart enough to know that shot was too stale to stay in the X, and he needed to hit an X, right, for that 660. So he let that shot down, and then when you hear him talk about the next shot, he talks about just very briefly about the pin movement, and then he talks about his release movement, right? So, and then, like I said, the only advice I give him is keep it moving. and he knows exactly what that means. So it's amazing to watch him shoot. It's pretty cool stuff.
Oh man,
yeah.
As a dad, I'm sure that makes you so proud.
Cool.
Right.
Pretty cool stuff.
And he just won a pretty good shoot.
Big shoot. Greater Oregon Safari. He took first in individual pro and that, and then won teams as well with his buddy Ryan Black. So yeah, it's impressive.
Especially his age. I mean, it still just blows me away that he just steps up and shoots with the big dogs.
I mean, it's not the age. It's the mind, right?
Yeah,
and,
totally.
And if you and people got to give their kids a chance. Like I was dealing with 2 youngsters there yesterday. I think 7-year-old Samantha and 13-year-old Cody, and the dad had purchased my online course and was teaching it to the kids as well. But the release that she was shooting, she couldn't hardly reach the trigger. So little Samantha, there's no way for her to wrap her finger around the trigger. So that was the first key to at least getting her the ability to work through that. But kids don't have enough life experience for shot control. That's just a reality. I mean, they haven't faced enough adversity yet and gained the perspective and the failure that it takes for somebody to really figure this out. So luckily, I kind of figured this stuff out, so we were able to put things together, and all ages can learn it. But there's certain ages where you just have to do a mechanical fix to not necessarily a mental problem, but it's just the way their mind works and the way the adult mind works is the same in shooting. They have an aversion to an explosion. Like I watched Bodie punch a trigger at 3 years old, and I'm like, nah, this ain't happening.
Go to your room.
No, you're not eating dinner today. So, but when I watched him punch that trigger, I'm like, okay, I know exactly what to do with this. Because what do you teach a 3-year-old? They don't have any comprehension of the science and all the stuff. So, and they certainly don't have determination, and they don't have determination probably up until teenage years at the earliest, right? Bodie was different just because I was able to work with him since such a young age. But tension activated releases for kids, amazing creation in the archery world, right? I don't necessarily like using them for adults because the release basically makes the decision for you. Safety in, draw the bow back, safety off, and then you pull and you set it to a holding weight for that bow, and you can get it. I mean, Samantha was only shooting a 25-pound bow. I was able to get that release down enough so where she could actually pull through it. So instantly put her into a tension activated release, and with the knowledge of how fast you can actually pull because she's done the signature test, so she knows the rate of movement that she needs. So she instantly started shooting that like a boss.
Really?
Right? And as most kids will. So, like, let's say that you have a kid that I'm just really yanking on that thing, like really punching a trigger really bad. So you take that tension activated release and you tighten it down to where they can yank all they want, but it ain't going off, right? So, and I do the same thing with adults.
Yeah.
So if I have an adult that just won't make the decision to go closed loop, I'll put them in a tension activated release and I'll screw that sucker down to where it won't go off. And what you see is safety on, they draw their bow back, safety off. I'm like, okay, start pulling. And you see they're very dainty with it. And they'll just barely be pulling, like, it ain't never going off. You're going to have to pull harder than that, right? And then they start to pull, and they'll get to a certain point, right, where they give it that big old yank where they normally would punch the trigger. All those pre-ignition movements, you get to see them, they yank that sucker, doesn't go off. Push the safety back in and let it down. And the simple question is, what are you thinking about? And the answer is always, well, I was thinking about pulling, but then, right? There's always a but then. I started thinking, when's this thing going to go off? How much is it going to take? And that's the exact moment when the subconscious goes, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of that for you, right? And so the subconscious autopilot comes in, open loop, yanks the trigger. But we now, because they had this big yank but it didn't go off, it's very jarring to the mind, and now you're open to some information, right? So safety in, they let it down, and what were you thinking about? I was thinking about pulling, but then, whatever it is, okay, I need you to just think about pulling. That's all you need to think about. Okay, so don't change how the release is set. Safety in, draw back, safety off, and they start pulling. And then they're pulling, and they get to the point of the whole body is shaking, and you see that they're actually working, but that big yank never comes in. Usually, I've never had anybody have to shoot it 3 times. Usually 2 times, and that is now the information, they've got it, right? So you get to the point where they're just pulling like crazy, and then it doesn't go off. Okay, push the safety and let it down. What were you thinking about? I was just thinking about pulling. Thank you. Right? Welcome to shot IQ. Right? So once you get that no jerk, then you start to loosen that release up to where now they really gotta pull into it, and it goes off. And it's not an accurate shot. That's not the point of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So now they're pulling, it goes off, and like, oh, that's what a surprise break is supposed to feel like. And then you can start to loosen that up, and then you can make it as accurate as it can get, right? But I don't like to keep adults in that. I will keep a young person in that till they're mature enough to understand that you can do that with every release, right? It's just simply concentration on the movement, whatever that is for that particular release.
And I remember at your clinic that you talked about you should be able to shoot any release.
Any release.
But I think so often people get hung up on that's the only style release they can shoot. And
they shoot that release because that's the only one they can control, right? So tension-activated releases will instantly change how you think and get you out of target panic, but it's not the most accurate system because it requires a lot of input. And I apologize to the archery manufacturers that make those things, but it's a great tool, but I like to use it as a training tool, right? And I only use it for just those few shots, and then I instantly put adults into a different type of release so they get to apply the science to a release that's more accurate or one that they like or one that they actually have or whatever. But kids, I will keep them in that until they're mature enough to understand that you can do that with other releases. But
makes sense.
You should be able to have 50 different releases in front of you, pick it up, understand how the trigger works. I'm shooting this thing with control. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
Right? Why wouldn't you? You know exactly how to do it. So if you need to test a release and how it feels, it doesn't do any good to punch it, right? Because you don't get to see how good is that sear or whatever it may be. So you really, once you understand the science, you get to start to pick equipment that really lends itself to this scientific shot. And but if an adult just picks up a tension activated release, they're going to be just instantly shooting it with control. But then you put them into something else, they never got the reps in making the decisions. If they stay in that tension activated release, you don't get reps in making the decisions.
Gotcha.
So therefore, you're stuck with that
Yeah.
until you learn the science of how the rest of it works. I mean, if a tension activated release, let's get real. If a tension activated release was the most accurate system, every professional archer would shoot one.
True.
It's just not the most accurate system because of the input that's required. But for control's sake, it's pretty awesome. But being based on preload, they're a little bit difficult to hunt with because you're a little bit more jacked up when you're shooting at a critter, more adrenaline, more tension, right? So you may draw that thing back, and it's based on your holding weight. Well, if you've pulled into that wall more, as soon as you take the safety off, she's going. So you got to be careful with preload and such with it, which can be done, right? But it's just not the most accurate system. But for gaining control, it's a pretty good tool. But I would only put an adult in that if they're having trouble making decisions. So
there's a lot of I've seen some throughout the years that they're basically trying to fudge, for lack of better words, when all it is just the mental part.
Yeah, it's a mechanical fix to a mental problem.
Yes.
And the archery industry is built around target panic, essentially.
It's like the one trigger. I remember the one, I remember the name, I'm not going to say it, but you pulled the trigger and pulled it back, and then when you let off, then it was opposite.
Yeah.
Do you remember that one by chance? When your hand or your
There's all kinds of them. There was ones back in the 90s, one made by Golden Key called the Answer. and it did you ever remember that one?
I don't know.
So it had a pin in it to where when you pulled the trigger, if you pulled it slow, the pin would come up against this, basically a fork in the road. So if you pulled it slow, the pin would go one way and it would actually fire. If you pulled it fast, it would go the other way and get jammed into the wall of the release.
Oh.
So you literally could not punch this release.
That's more of a mine.
Oh yeah, you couldn't punch it. So it was funny because back then they're like, "Oh, let's see if you can do it." Turn. This is when I worked in a bow shop. This is 1993, right? Worked in a bow shop. Like, let's see if you can do it, Turner. I'm like, "Oh, I can do it." Right on a blank bail. On a blank bail, I can do it all day long. Right? You put me on a target. No, that wasn't happening.
That's funny.
So yeah.
Let's talk a little about some of your hunts. What do you got going on this year?
So this year, I drew a really good blacktail tag in Washington, which is going to be cool because my hunting partner is a ghost. I mean, he slips through timber like a ghost, literally. He kills these monster blacktail bucks and hunts them in high country, big timber, and I just don't have the patience that he has. I mean, he will just one step, stop for 5 minutes, one step. Look, man, I have trouble doing that, but I'm trying to learn how to still hunt like he does because he kills some monster blacktails. Well, he and I both drew a really good blacktail tag. We drew, not even putting in together, we drew 2 of the 8 tags.
Oh, wow.
So now we get to hunt that same area that he kills these big bucks in, but we get to hunt it in the rut, like November 1st to the 20th. So that's going to be really fun.
Wow.
And so that's coming up, and we've got deer and elk tags for Montana as well.
Nice.
And I'll be elk hunting in Washington and Montana. So trying to learn Montana a bit. I don't necessarily know exactly where I'm going, but I've been doing some scouting and stuff. So lots of e-scouting.
You're not doing no guiding?
No, not this. Well, maybe a little bit, but it'll be early if I do some of that. So yeah, I'm just trying to get a spot where I can call Bodie in a bull. He really wants me to call him in a bull.
He's killed a bull, hasn't he?
He's killed 2 bulls with his bow, but they were both one tree stand, one blind.
Oh, okay.
So he really wants me to call him one in, which would be fun.
Absolutely.
Because you've won the world. I mean, I know elk calling contest as opposed to elk hunting is different, but you.
Years ago, I won the world championships in the pro division twice, 2008 and 2010. Yeah. And
so you can call.
Yeah, I've done some calling. I've got very simple ways of calling these bulls, and by humanizing elk calling, and I didn't learn how to call elk by watching elk. I mean, I learned the sounds from elk, but I literally learned how to call elk in by watching bar fights as a cop.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Right? You watch human beings, which are simply mammals that have no inhibitions, and it is literally like the elk woods. I mean, so as an example, there's a lot of people that will go in to the elk woods and they will do challenge bugles, which is pretty much any bugle with a chuckle, right? Any bugle with a chuckle. Now this is a generalized statement. There's people that are way smarter than me on elk vocalizations, but I can do just about every vocalization that an elk can do on a mouth reed. So I had to figure out how do I humanize this stuff, because we don't speak elk, but when you bugle with a chuckle is a bull-to-bull communication, right? So if I was to say to you, Darrell, we're going to the bar, okay? We go to the bar and we're both standing at the front door. I say, okay, Darrell, you've got 30 seconds to go in the bar and get in a fight with another male. You can't touch anybody. You can only use your words. What is your strategy? What's your strategy for that? How would you do it?
Asking me?
I'm asking you. How would you do that?
Oh, I'd walk up to somebody and...
Somebody meaning a male?
Yeah.
Okay, and what would you say to this male?
Yeah, I'm not going to fight no girl.
Okay, you're not going to fight a girl, right? But I've only given you 30 seconds to do this.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that you're going to go challenge a male, right?
Yeah.
That is very low odds. Because if you go into a bar, let's think real life here. You go into a bar and you challenge a male, it is totally dependent on his attitude whether he fights you or not. Right?
Yes.
Completely dependent on his attitude at that moment whether he fights you or not.
I know where you're going with this, I think.
But if you go and you talk to his lady,
exactly.
He has no option but to remove you from the bar.
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't even talk to him, you give him the hand, right? You don't even talk to him. You just continue to talk to his female. You will find yourself in a fight 100% of the time, no matter what country you are in, even if you don't speak the language. Right?
Yeah, you're
so
right.
this is very high odds elk calling. So if you bugle with a chuckle, you're challenging the dude.
Yeah.
And you are dependent on his attitude. If you go in and you bugle with no chuckle, you are talking to the cows. Therefore, he has no option but to remove you from the bar.
Yeah.
Right? So, and another thing, people like to cow call. I haven't made a mature cow sound in the last 5 years of elk hunting. Why would you? Right? Because, I mean, cow calling it's an industry in itself. But when was the last time that a bunch of human females got together in their little clique and talked nicely about another female that wants to procreate with their man that they have chosen? Doesn't happen, right? So if you go and you get close to a herd and you do a mature cow sound, you are now the hussy in the bushes.
Yeah.
They are not going to let their bull go play with the hussy in the bushes. So you've just completely killed your odds in that call-in with a mature cow sound. And it doesn't take more than one, right? You go in and you send out a mature cow mew. Doesn't matter if you do the estrus scream or buzz or whatever you do. If you do a mature cow sound, you just killed it. Now, you will call in some bulls with a cow sound, right? There are some dudes that if a woman was screaming in the street, they would come out of the bar and check it out, right? But if you were to place a baby in the street and there's a baby crying outside, the bar is now emptied into the street, right? Because everybody wants to help a baby. So if you do any female elk sounds, keep it on the calf spectrum because that's non-intrusive to the herd system, right? Everybody wants to call in the calf. So if you send out, like, you get in this canyon and you don't know if there's any elk in there, you don't necessarily want to bugle to be this new bull in the canyon. It's after daylight, so we're not doing location bugles. Send out a lost calf series down through that canyon. Every elk in that canyon is going to do something, right? They are at least going to move, break that branch. If it's a bull that would come into a cow call, they're certainly going to come into a calf call. They're pedophiles anyways, right? They don't care how old that calf is.
Yeah.
If a bull bugles back to you with that bull calling cows bugle, that short, raspy bugle with no chuckles, he's trying to call you into the herd, right? If he bugles from the same spot twice, he has cows. If he bugles and he has moved and bugles again, he doesn't have cows, or he's at least left his cows. So now you're dealing with a satellite bull. So continue with the calf sounds to call that bull in. But if that bull is staying in that one spot, he's got cows. So now it's a bar scene. You simply slip in quiet, you get in on his cows, and you do the bull calling cows bugle. He now comes out to kill you, right? I've called in 48 herd bulls with that sound in the last 7 years. It's not a coincidence, right? Yeah. I don't bugle with chuckles, and I don't make mature cow sounds. I make bull calling cows bugle when I get in tight on a herd with cows. I do calf sounds to locate elk. I'll do, if I need to do some midday locating, I'll do tending bugles and glunking. And then before light, I'll do location bugles. That's pretty much it, right?
I think the glunking, people don't realize how effective that is.
Right. I mean, you think about what that sound is. It's a sound of a bull tending an estrus cow.
Yeah.
So if you get yourself in a bugling frenzy, bulls are all over, cows are mewing, everybody's bugling, carrying on. If you get in there and you do your bull calling cows bugle, that's what everybody's doing. So it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So now you got to become the cool kid in the locker room, right? Because as soon as you glunk, as soon as you're in that frenzy and you glunk, you are now the cool kid in the locker room. You got one.
Yeah,
right?
because when you hear them glunking, they're right on the
They're
cow.
on them, right? Yeah. So now everybody's, hey, he's got one.
Yeah.
And the whole frenzy will move to you.
I had a bull do that. That was hung up, and I was doing the bull cow call. and he would bugle and everything, but he didn't realize I was actually closer to his cows than he was. And when I glunked, he was raking a tree up there. I mean, he ran as hard, because now I'm right by the girls.
And you're glunking.
Yeah. Shot my recurve at like 12 yards.
Nice. So raking, very effective, is almost the exact same thing as a bull calling cow's bugle. It is a display type of thing, and they will come into it just like they do a bull calling cow's bugle. I just like to make noise, so. But so I mean, it's pretty simple. My elk calling system is pretty simple. It's not my elk calling; it's just how they work, right? Yeah. I like to look at the science of things. It's just mammal biology. Yeah. You look at a bar scene, just step back one night and watch what happens, right? And you'll get two people that are in a parking lot. You'll get a dude and his wife. This guy's yelling at the wife. This guy will yell back first, right? So he bugles back to him with a challenge bugle. So he'll bugle back with chuckles, right? And then once he starts across the parking lot, he doesn't stop till he gets to where that guy is or was. So there's no hang-up spot with the bull calling cow's bugle. They just... He only hung up because he was
that
raking.
Analogy, but it totally makes.
He only hung up because he was raking a tree.
Yeah.
Right. So if you send another bull calling cow's bugle past him on that, he will then lose his mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had drunk people, walk past me to get to the other guy, and I'm standing there in full uniform, right? Like, what are you doing? And they just walk, like their eyes are rolled back in their head, just like a big old bull, right? Yeah. And they just walk right on by me. So, I mean, these bulls really, truly get in a trance almost. They're so pissed off.
Oh, man.
They just, like that bull I shot in 19, I mean, that thing walked into 10 yards and just started throwing stuff off the ground with his antlers. It was just amazing. Yeah. So, and that bull, I mean, we're standing in the open, big cedar trees, but we're standing, there's no vegetation around us. Seth and I are standing 10 feet apart. And this bull I thought he was going to walk right over Seth, but he stopped at 10 yards and just starts pitching sticks and mud and stuff in the air. So, yeah, it was pretty fun.
Got a real memorable hunt you want to share with us?
Oh, my gosh.
Probably a lot of them.
Yeah, there's so many. I remember in 2005, I had a good mule deer tag in Washington, and I was shooting compound bare bow with a release. Now, because in 2005 I was such a trigger puncher, I bought what was called a can't punch release, which was an index finger trigger that had two triggers on it. It had a solid trigger that didn't move, and the other trigger was just up above it. So if you punched the trigger, you actually moved your finger away from the real trigger. So you had to like lay your finger on there and then work your finger back this way to actually make it go off. Wow. And so I was shooting bare bow, and I had this setup specifically made for my point on was 70 yards. So at 70 yards, I could put the point right exactly where I wanted, just like a sight pin, right? So I remember it was snowy, and that was really crunchy snow, and I was by myself, and I'd found this nice buck, 5x5 muley, and I'd lost him. I don't know where he went to, and I was creeping down this one ridge, and I saw him down there bedded, and I remember ranging him, and he was 80 yards. I'm like, okay, I got to get closer. So I'm inching forward, just crack, crack. I mean, the snow was just crazy, crunchy, frozen ice. And so I got to 72, and I'm ranging. I'm like, oh, I need 2 more steps, right? So I do 2 more steps, and I get to 70 yards exactly, and he's bedded, facing away from me. And I remember drawing my bow back, and that release made decisions for me, right? Because I knew it wouldn't work if I punched it. So I drew my bow back, and it was downhill slightly, and I hooked into that release, and I remember just working through that trigger. Bah! I shot that shot, and I hit that buck in the shoulder at 70 yards bedded. I watched the arrow fly down through, and whap, it hit him, and he comes running at me, comes closer. I get another arrow on, I draw my bow back. He's now 40 yards, broadside, stopped, and I yarded I yarded that release. Like, I mean, it's a can't punch, but I managed to punch it. But my arrow did not go anywhere close to where I needed to. And so I tracked that. I missed that shot, an easy shot. Just, I mean, it was like, yeah. Up it went, and didn't make any decisions on that one. I watched that buck bed down, and I had to leave him overnight. And he died shortly thereafter, but I wasn't gonna. It was getting really cold that night, and
didn't want to take a chance.
Yeah, so I remember going in there the next morning, just right at the crack of daylight, and he was laying there. It was really cool to see him there. But man, what a shooting nightmare that was! Oh my gosh! Yeah. So that was one for the ages. But yeah, there's lots of stories out there. Elk. Well, the most memorable elk was that one I was just talking about. That bull. I drew a special tag in Washington, and funny how it all came together. We met these fellas that I actually grew up with, and they were Native Americans, so they get to hunt that unit every other year. And so they had some pretty good intel, but they weren't willing to go where they needed to. This one bull. It was funny because we were standing there talking to them. I met them in the road. We had hiked into this place. They were able to drive in, so they drove in, and I'm looking at this kid. I mean, he was just a little bit younger than me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, man, you look familiar. He goes, you look familiar too. And I said, well, my name's Joel Turner. He goes, oh, I'm so and so. I'm like, oh yeah, I grew up with you. Went to the same high school, and his dad was sitting in the passenger seat, and I shot bows with his dad for years because they were old finger shooters, right? Yeah. And so there's a guy that's sitting in the back, and he's not saying anything, right? And so we're BSing and stuff, and as we're sitting there talking, I can hear this bull bugling, and he's way down by the river, and it is a nasty nightmare to get down there. I mean, I don't even really know at this point how to get down there. And this old boy's just sitting in the back. He's not saying nothing. Well, then everybody gets out of the trucks, and we're sitting there, talking and in the middle of the road, and this bull bugles again, and he goes, you hear that bull down there? I said, yeah. He goes, that's what we call the growler. He goes, we've been listening to that bull in that hole for 4 years. He goes, we ain't going down there. I said, well, we'll go down there. So me and my hunting partner, we figured out how to get in there. We actually had to cross the river. So he told us about this old horse trail that went along the river. So we went and found the horse trail, and we go across there, and we crossed the river. And it was just like elk heaven on the other side of the river because nobody goes back in there. So we start working up through this just nasty blow down. It was nasty canyon, and we found an old road system in there that we could see on the Onyx, but it was all dug out. So we go up this old road system, and I couldn't get him to bugle, and I was calf calling, trying to locate him, and I finally got his buddy to bugle, right? Because there was always two bulls that would always bugle back and forth all night long down there. We listened to him for a couple nights, and so as soon as his buddy bugled, the growler bugled. I'm like, okay. So we had to climb up this clear cut through this leaf strip of nasty timber, and we got up on the road system kind of close to where he was, and we start working down the road, and I'm calf calling. And now I can hear his cows are just losing their mind, and he's losing his mind. He's doing sounds that I've never heard come out of an elk. I mean, it sounded like a bear growling. It was crazy what this bull was doing. And so I shut off all my sounds because now he's basically locating himself. And there was a big horseshoe clear cut, and in the middle of the horseshoe was this most incredible cedar patch, big cedars, very little vegetation on the ground. It was like bare dirt because they've been living in there in this cedar patch. So Seth and I pop up into the cedar patch, and we're literally giggling to ourselves because we're walking on bare dirt toward these elk that can't see us. We've got the wind right. And so we get up toward the head of the horseshoe, and it's always the same sequence. I get ready, Seth gets ready, and I look at him, and I always go, you ready? Yep, I'm ready. And he knows I'm going to do the bull calling cows bugle. So the elk are about 50, 60 yards, but we can't see them there in the jack firs, all kinds of stuff. And so I give him the bull calling cows bugle, and the place just erupts. There's cows going all over the place, and I'm watching all this chaos, and I'm seeing trees moving, and I look over at Seth, and Seth draws his bow back. And I'm having this internal dialogue to myself, because 2 days earlier, he had missed a big 6x8 bull that I'd called in for him because he drew his bow early. Oh. And he was having to hold it forever. Just the way this bull acted, he was holding it forever and shot an arrow right over the bull's back. So I'm looking at him, he draws his bow back. I'm like, we don't even see this thing yet, man. I'm like, why are you drawing your bow back already? You're going to do this again, right?
You're thinking to yourself.
But then I'm thinking, maybe he sees something I don't see, because he's about 10, 15 feet to my right. And just as I regain consciousness and look forward, that monster bull comes around this root wad at 30 yards. And all I see is the front brow tines. And I'm just like, oh my God, that's a monster, right? And I'm hiding behind the limb of my recurve. And this bull is literally walking right at us. And I know Seth's at full draw. And I've called Seth in quite a few bulls, right? And he was gracious enough to let me shoot this one. But I know he's at full draw, and I'm not at full draw yet. And it's walking right at us, and I'm literally talking to Seth out loud. I go, just shoot him. Shoot him if you got a shot, right? And this bull is walking towards us. And he's in literally eyes rolled back in his head, trance. And that bull stops 10 yards from me, probably 12 yards from Seth, and just sticks his antlers in the ground and just starts throwing mud and sticks and stuff all over the place. I mean, he had to see us there. We're just standing. And so the bull is facing me, and then he would flop his body sideways, broadside, and he's throwing stuff. And I'm kind of hesitant to get to full draw because I think he's going to see me, and then he'd flop his body towards, facing me, and then broadside and facing me, and just like he's hopping all over the place. And just throwing stuff everywhere. And I get to half draw, and he stops, and he looks at me. And I'm stuck at half draw with my 50-pound recurve. I'm like, oh my God, I can't hold this very long. And then he goes back to the ground throwing stuff. So I let down. And in all my seminars, in all my elk calling seminars, I always talk about when they're rubbing trees or got their antlers in the ground throwing stuff, their eyes are closed. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, hey, stupid, practice what you preach, right? So I look at his face, I'm like, yep, he's got his eyes closed. So I draw my bow back, and as soon as I draw my bow back, he turns broadside. Oh. Right? He turns broadside, and I'm looking down the shaft of my arrow, and it's going in the middle, right? I mean, I'm looking down the shaft of the arrow, and then I see there's a stick that he has rooted up. Because there was nothing there before. He has rooted this stick up, and it is now exactly in the outline of the crease of his shoulder. And I'm like, oh my God, don't screw this up. Don't hit that stick, right? So I lean back a little bit at full draw, which put the profile of the stick in his shoulder, right? So now it opened up behind the shoulder. Mm-hmm. And every fiber of my being is just saying, just shoot it. Just shoot it. Just let it go, right? Just let it go. I'm like all the way back to 2008 again, right? I'm like, just let it go, And I'm like, I remember saying, I'm looking down the shaft of that arrow. I remember saying, no, I ain't doing that. And then here I go, and then I start pressing on my grips here, and that thing pops, and poof, I shoot that arrow, and it just disappears. Boop! Right through him in the exact X, right? Nice. As soon as I shot him, he whirls. Seth shoots him, right? And Seth shoots him in the shoulder, and he whirls out of there. I look at Seth, I'm like, we just killed that big effort, right? And he's getting another arrow out. I'm like, what you doing?
No need.
Right.
I'm like, what you doing? And I'm like, oh, maybe he's not dead yet. I look, the bull's standing there 30 yards away broadside.
Really?
Right? And I'm like,
in such a trance, he didn't even.
I'm like, maybe I should shoot him again. So that's our thing. We shoot them until they stop wiggling, right? Yeah. You know how tough elk are. So I get another arrow out. I draw my bow back, and he's standing with his vitals behind a cedar tree. And Seth's arrow comes in from the side and hits him in the backstrap just as I let go, and my arrow center punched that cedar tree.
Shit.
I shot a good arrow, but it went right in the middle of the cedar tree where that bull went 60 yards and fell over dead. Nice. And then it was a 4.5 mile pack out. Yeah. What an epic pack out that was. Thank God Seth is a mule. That guy can pack some meat.
But you had your pack system thing.
I didn't have it.
You didn't?
No. Pack out bags, folks. Pack out bags are amazing amazing invention. I don't put meat in a backpack anymore. So, yeah.
I'll tell you about that one.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty cool. Made right here in Idaho.
Are they?
Yeah. So,
right on, Will.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's the life history of me.
There you go.
Well, we really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and driving the extra time. And I know when we first talked about even doing the podcast, I says, we got to get Joel on here. Yeah. And if you remember, I contacted you, and I'm thinking, he's never going to be by. And then you said, I got something going on in July. And I was thinking, all right, if we got to wait till then. But,
yeah. Well, hopefully it was worth the wait.
Very much.
100%.
Worth the wait. And perfect timing. I mean, we still got plenty of time till season, so people need to get a hold of your course or whatever, go to one of your deals.
Yep, shotiq.com, the online course is on there. It's got the new rifle courses coming out next week, and there's a precision pistol course which has all the combat pistol and precision pistol in it.
Which, I told you last night.
And then of course the archery course, and it doesn't take long. It takes a couple hours to watch the course, and then it takes however long it takes you to make a decision.
To fly.
Right? It's not a long process. You can change your life in one shot, literally.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and the new one you got is called what? The new course you got?
Precision long gun.
Precision long gun.
And it's not a long range course. It is how to control your trigger with any rifle system, any position, right? Then once you can apply that science to that trigger press, then you can go ahead and do your long distance, whatever whatever you're going to do. But really, it's pretty fun because I got to shoot some old weapon systems in there, and just applying the science to, how do you apply the science to an old 30-40 Craig bolt action rifle?
Right.
If that's what you got, that's what you got, right?
Yeah.
An old 270 Savage, or I shoot quite a bit with my 308 Tika on there as well. So it's just a lot of fun, and it really shows you how to actually apply the science of control process shooting to a rifle. Yeah.
Awesome. And thank you for, like the clinic, like I said, I know John and I both got a ton out of it, and highly recommend it to anybody.
I appreciate it.
And no matter how long you've been shooting, you can always, as long as you got an open mind and like we've said.
It definitely dispels some rumors that are out there that have been around for decades.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
No kidding.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks very much, Joel.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate
I appreciate you making the trip too.
Yeah.
That was awesome. It was an effort for you to get here. So
that's all right.
We
It's good steak.
It's just driving. Oh, the steak was good, buddy. Yeah. Appreciate that.
We did some
well worth
oak smoked steaks last night.
Did you?
Yeah,
Awesome.
good.
Well worth it.
Good.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks everyone for your support. Appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cool.